This is spear-leaved orache, Atriplex prostrata, a member of the amaranth family. It's especially common around the coast in salt marshes or soil above the high tide line. It's also found inland, growing on cultivated land or disturbed soil. There are several species of orache and they all look quite similar, but they're all edible. The leaves and young stems can all be used in a very similar way to spinach, and you can eat them either raw or cooked. They've got a salty flavour with a bit of a nuttiness. There's no need to add salt to them when you're cooking them because they're already quite salty, as are most salt marsh plants. The flavour of the leaves and the stems is best at about this stage, and they're still quite young, around late spring and early summer. You want to get it before it goes into flower because then it's not very nice tasting. The leaves are arrow shaped. They look fairly similar to fat hen leaves. Fat hen's edible anyway, so it doesn't matter too much. But with fat hen, the leaves taper at the base. But spear-leaved orache has more squared leaves at the base. And you see they've got two wings on the side pointing out at 90 degrees. The leaves are often covered in a pale bloom, which rubs off, especially on the younger leaves. They often lose this as they mature. So when you get a big patch from like this, you get a bit of a silvery sheen from the leaves, from that pale bloom. So here's a slightly more mature one. It's still nowhere near full size. They can get up to almost a metre when they're fully grown. But you see the leaves are a bit bigger and they've lost most of that bloom. I'll still eat these at this stage, but I'd probably cook these ones rather than eat them raw. So these stems, you see, they can have a bit of a red tinge to them sometimes, especially by the leaf nodes. They go a bit red there. You do get some pretty big patches of this spear-leaved orache. At this time of year, late spring and early summer, our coastlines and estuaries are absolutely filled with good edible wild foods. So I like this at this stage here where its young leaves are all pointing upwards. These are really good. So right next door here, got another edible coastal plant. This is sea arrowgrass. So for me, I absolutely find this one disgusting, but I'm including it anyway because I know a lot of people do like this. So it's got a taste of coriander, which is odd because I really like coriander, but then it's got a really strange aftertaste which I can't really describe. It grows in quite dense clumps all along tidal mudflats and soil all around the coast. And you'll see the leaf blades, you get several, will come and join at quite a succulent stem. And those leaf blades have got a grooved ridge. The only thing that you'll really mistake this for is sea plantain, which is also edible. I'll probably include that in next month's videos. So usually the younger leaves are eaten, and the flower stems as well, like this. So these are the flowers. They don't really look much like flowers, but once they're pollinated, they'll turn into these. These are the fruits, or the seed pods. So the best flower stems are the ones like this, where the flowers are still quite bunched up. Now I don't mind these too much, as long as they're cooked a bit like asparagus. I'll eat these sometimes, but mostly they're one that'll just stay out of my basket. Just a little word of caution on this plant. You don't want to eat too much of it. It can be mildly toxic if eaten in large quantities. But to be fair, a lot of the foods we eat can be mildly toxic. It's all about dosage. Even bananas are mildly toxic. So yeah, it's not one that you should be eating every day. Maybe just try it every now and again. It's usually pretty easy to spot sea arrowgrass when you're walking around an estuary or mudflat. It's darker than most of the grasses and plantains that it's grown around. You see there's darker patches there, there and there. You can usually see those from quite far away. In late May, the new tips of Douglas fir can be harvested. They have a sharp, citrusy flavour and have many uses, both sweet and savoury, similar to the spruce tips, which I talked about in the first of the May videos. They're good for making syrups, for being used on desserts. They're also good infused into sugar. They can be used for making tea or even infusing into alcohol. And you can dry them and use them as a herb rub in the same sort of way as thyme or rosemary. So this time of year we're after these fresh bright green tips that are just starting to break free of the papery sheath. That's when they're at their best. You can use the more mature needles all year, but the fresh growth is better. So that's about the right stage there. This tree next to it has ones that are a bit more mature. These are still usable, but they won't be quite as good. Out of all the edible conifers, Douglas fir has the most risk of being confused with the deadly poisonous yew tree. I strongly recommend you don't consume Douglas fir needles until you can tell the difference between Douglas fir and yew. I'll go through the differences in a moment. Douglas fir has a strong citrusy resinous aroma when you crush the needles. And very importantly, on the underside of the needles, this is really just the more mature ones, you'll see there's two thin white lines. This is a good indicator of fir trees. This is a really important feature because yew doesn't have this. Also check around the bases of the trees for the pine cones. And Douglas fir has really distinctive looking pine cones. You'll see it has three-pronged bracts sticking out between the scales. It's said they look like the hindquarters of mice because it's got the two legs and then a thin tail. So this is a key identifier for Douglas fir. There's no other trees that have pine cones that look like this, so a very good indicator. Douglas fir isn't native to the UK, but it can be found all over, especially in parks and plantations. Especially in Wales, you get some really large Douglas fir plantations. The Douglas fir trees grow really tall. If you're in the middle of the woodland, most of the foliage will be only at the top. So find a clearing like this or the edges of the woodland and you'll find growth that you can reach. Here's a yew tree. As I said before, you really need to know the difference because yew trees are deadly poisonous. So they look quite similar at first, the needles. Both Douglas fir and yew have flat needles, but I'll show you how to tell the difference. So if you look on the underside of the needles, the Douglas fir, like I said, they have two white lines that are very thin on the underside, whereas yew doesn't have that. It just has a raised ridge running down the length of the middle of the blade. Another thing is if you crush the leaves and smell them, yew doesn't really have a scent, whereas Douglas fir smells kind of citrusy and resinous. So as long as you can tell those features apart, you can be pretty sure you're not going to poison yourself. A yew tree is a very important one to learn if you ever forage from conifer trees. May is a good time to harvest wild lettuce. Wild lettuces are edible and medicinal herbs. They do apparently help with headaches and insomnia, though I haven't used them for this myself. And they're traditionally used as a mild pain relief. Wild lettuces like full sun and will grow just about anywhere that gets a lot of sunlight, like cracks in pavements, in gardens, and field edges, especially in disturbed soil. There are several types of wild lettuce. This one is prickly lettuce, Lactuca cereola. Its leaves are long and narrow, especially at the base of the plant, and it's got spines on the margin. They're nothing like thistle, they're not that sharp. It also has spines on the underside along the midrib. The midribs are very prominent and they can start going a bit red, especially on the lower leaves. The leaves clasp the stem. So they grow pretty tall, and the stems can sometimes get a bit of a purple colouring, and nearer the base they can have really fine spines on. The leaves need to be trimmed before eating, get the spines off. You only really want to eat the younger leaves. This one's a bit too mature now. You can see it's just starting to go into flower. But these younger ones here, where you get the rosettes, they are better to eat. They've got a nice mild lettuce flavour. Once they get to this stage, they get quite bitter. But you can still use this one for medicinal purposes. But as they do have quite strong medicinal values, I only eat wild lettuces in quite small amounts. Back in March we looked at Alexanders and foraging the young stems and unopened flower buds. Now in May and through summer we can harvest the seed pods. They have a really strong flavour, just like green peppercorns, and can be used in the same sort of way. So you can either dry them and use them as a whole spice, or grind them into a powder, or you can use them fresh. They're really good in curries and stews, and I also like to make a peppercorn sauce with them, like an Alexander's style peppercorn sauce. Each fruit or seed pod is made of 2 segments, and each segment has 3 ridges. The seed pods will turn from green to black as they mature, and they've got a really strong perfumed aroma. The fruits are high in protein and fatty acids. The whole plant is high in vitamin C, and it was traditionally used by sailors to help cure scurvy. Just be absolutely certain you have Alexander's before consuming any part of this plant. Getting this mixed up with hemlock water droplet could be a deadly mistake. Now is a good time to collect rose petals. All roses are edible, so you can use the ones from your garden if they haven't been sprayed with chemicals, or you can use roses growing wild. So our native roses, the dog rose, Rosa canina, or several other species that look very similar, can be found growing in hedgerows, around waste grounds like this, and field edges. Dog rose is a climbing plant, so you'll see it growing through other bushes and trees. And it has long arched stems that are covered in really sharp hooked thorns. Its leaves are alternate, and they're compound leaves, so made of smaller leaflets, and the leaflets are toothed. They flower from May and throughout summer, and they have 5 petals which are white or pink. They have a sweet smell, though not as strong a smelling as most ornamental roses. The best blossoms come from the Japanese rose, Rosa rugosa, which you're more likely to find in parks and gardens, though I do occasionally find them growing wild. When picking rose blossoms, just take the petals. There's no need to take the whole flower. That way, there's a good chance you'll get the rose hips later on in the year as well. Rose petals can be used to infuse alcohol or make jam or cordial. You can also make rose water by simply simmering the petals in a small amount of water. Once the petals lose their colour, you can strain the liquid and cool it. And you can use rose water to make Turkish delight, and traditionally it was used as a base for making perfumes. This is clover. The leaves and the flowers are edible. Clover can be found in most grasslands. It especially likes well trodden ground, so look near pathways and the entrances of fields, and it can usually be found in quite huge numbers in most fields. The most common types are red clover, Trifolium pratense, and white clover, Trifolium ripens. So clover is fairly high in protein for a plant. It's about 5% protein. I'll use the leaves and flowers in salads or making smoothies or tea, and I'll also put them in soups and stews. So clover is from the pea family, and you get a mould flavour of pea from the leaves and the flowers. The leaves are usually divided into 3, and you get little white chevrons or little arrows on the leaves, and the leaves are oval. So these sometimes get confused with wood sorrel, which has 3 heart-shaped leaves, but wood sorrel is also edible.